Hi, I'm Joe Saunders with Miniature Landscape Hobbies. In this episode, we're going to build on some of our previous episodes by working with the Battlefield in a Box terrain bundle releases for Team Yankee. There's 5 new exciting releases that include a variety of terrain for your battlefields. We've worked with 2 of these bundles previously. We've covered the apartment bundle and the storefront bundle. Now it's time to move on to the next one. We're going to work with the industrial bundle, which includes a factory and 4 of these really great fuel tanks. Let's get to it. Miniature Landscape Hobbies is proudly supported by these sponsors. It's an exciting time for Team Yankee players. Nordic Forces has just been released, and NATO Forces is coming up in the immediate future. To coincide with this, Battlefront has been releasing tons of new terrain, including the new shipping containers and huge themed scenery bundles. In some of my previous episodes, I've been hard at work covering all of this awesome content, and I've applied a little extra artistry to each terrain kit to make them that much better. So now we come to the industrial terrain bundle, which just might be my favorite in the whole series. Inside this bundle, you'll find 2 dark gray fuel tanks, 2 light gray ones, a massive 3-story factory building, and a set of concrete walls. This is a ton of terrain, which is suitable for any 15mm game. All these pieces are excellent, and all are very well painted straight out of the box. If you don't want to do any extra work, you can just put them straight on the table. However, I'm not one to settle, and I intend to build on the already excellent paint job on these models. For the purposes of this video, I intend to focus on the storage tanks and a little bit on the walls. Now I hear you ask, why not the factory? Well, the factory is a massive and fun model to use both for wargaming and also to paint. But I've already covered it in a previous video series. I'll put up a link so you can check it out for yourself. Since I've already shown how to go to town on this model and add all sorts of custom details and also a very specific base, I think we can safely focus on the other items in the set. Time to get to work. Do you like free paint? Of course you would. You're a miniature painter. And now could be your lucky day because Miniature Landscape Hobbies is holding a contest. You can win a free Army Painter Most Wanted speed paint set. In order to enter, all you need to do is comment on a post on Miniature Landscape Hobbies pages for Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. Share your favorite hobby tip and then enter #MLH to participate. First up, I decide to give the storage tanks some service hatches. I grab 4 old tank hatches from my bits box and super glue them to a piece of balsa wood to hold them. Then I prime them gray and wash them down with Gravelord Gray speed paint. This is a fast and easy way to build some cool detail. We'll come back to this part later. The storage tanks are quite large and honestly maybe a little boring. They're just begging for detail, so I decided to paint the Miniature Landscape Hobbies logo onto 2 of them. I start by measuring how high the tanks are, and I cut a strip of paper to the same height and diameter. With a compass, I now draw out a circle in the middle of the paper to form a template. I go ahead and cut the circle out. The template then gets stuck to the storage tanks using masking tape. I spray the circular hole antique white and let this dry. Going back to the original circle that I cut out previously, I redraw a slightly narrower circle on this and cut it down to be smaller. This gets reattached with masking tape to the center of the antique white area. Using this new circle as a guide, I take German bright camouflage green and paint a ring around the exterior of the whole thing to make a border for my logo. Some cleanup work is required with a fine brush to make everything neat. And then, taking a soft lead pencil, I sketched the Miniature Landscape Hobbies logo into the middle of each circle. I now block it in with German dark gray, more camouflage bright green, and brown. At this point, I have a reasonable approximation of my logo on 2 of the storage tanks. Not a work of art by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it gets the point across. And, speaking of points, at this point I take the hatches and glue them down on top of each tank. Now I can get down to building definition with highlights. I pour out deck tan and set to work dry brushing the storage tanks to accentuate the upper surfaces and the edges. I also gently dry brush the logos to imply fading. As is always the case with dry brushing, I've created some highlights, but at the cost of chalkiness. To solve this, I need to unify the surface. I decided in this case to use MIG ammo shaders. I spray the tanks down with the product called dirt, and then light rust. When these are dry, everything has been toned down, and the chalkiness is gone. Another side effect of dry brushing is losing definition in the dark recesses of the model. So now I fix this by lining in. For the light gray tanks, I add 50% acrylic thinner to 50% Grim Black speed paint. This flows quite well, and I go ahead and paint it into the seams of the tank with a fine brush. For the dark gray storage tanks, I encountered an issue. They're just too dark to line in with black. So I did the opposite. I mixed 50-50 acrylic thinner with holy white and lined it in with this. It looked pretty good to me, though I've never done anything like this before. The definition was now good, but everything looked just too neat. It was time for chipping. I poured out silver gray and tore off a jagged piece of packing sponge that I dipped in the paint. After wiping off the excess, I then used this to add random dots and shapes to each storage tank. I did this for both the light and dark gray tanks. To build an impression of rust, I took Hull Red and light rust paints and added small dots, stippling them into the silver gray marks. This took quite some time, but it added a ton of visual interest, especially where I chipped over the logos, which helped the rust tones really pop. Now it was time to weather everything, and to do this I turned to my ever so useful weathering pencils. I grabbed earth tones, rust tones, and even some shades of green to do this. I wet each pencil tip with water, then I applied a blob of the various rust colors over the chips, more or less at random, although I didn't cover all of them. The tanks got the earth tones and the greens near the bottom. When these blobs had all dried, I went back with a moist brush and either stippled these or blended these blobs into downward streaks. The tanks were now well in hand, but the walls at this point did not match. So going back to the greens and earth tones, I applied the weathering pencils to the walls themselves and blended them just as I did for the tanks. I also used white glue to add a couple of random grass and bush tufts to the bottom of each of the walls to build some interest. Now everything was pretty much finished, but I needed to protect my work. To do this, I applied several coats of matte varnish to the storage tanks and each wall section. And with this, the project was done. Let's get to the reveal, shall we? If you would like to learn more about working with 15mm terrain, please watch this video. Or you may want to watch this video on painting 15mm vehicles instead. Thanks for watching, And as always, remember to keep building life in miniature.